in their rate cases. I'm at a loss as to why the industry isn't apparently securing its assets, but clearly the time has come for change. I am pleased to join Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member King and my other colleagues in co-sponsoring H.R. 2195. Given the industry's lackluster approach towards securing its own assets, I believe this measure will provide the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission with the appropriate authorities to ensure that our grid is secure and resilient against the threats we face in the 21st century. This subcommittee will continue to perform rigorous oversight until we are satisfied that progress is being made. I now recognize my colleague, the gentleman from California, Ranking Member Mr. Lundgren, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I commend you for holding this hearing on the security of our nation's electric grid. As you know, I share your concern about the continuing vulnerability of our electric grid, which many consider the most critical piece of our nation's infrastructure. As everyone knows, without electricity, our banking, commerce, transportation, health, and medical services would be unavailable or severely limited. Indeed, our economy and the public welfare have become severely dependent on electricity. Consequently, securing this grid is a critical national and economic priority that Congress must, and I'm sure we will, address with urgency. In recent decades, the push towards making our society more reliant on electric power has also made us more vulnerable. Because of expanding digital and computerized connections, our electric grid is now, more than ever, vulnerable to cyber and physical attacks. And these attacks could disable wide segments of the grid for weeks, months, possibly years. The effective functioning of the electric grid is highly dependent on today's control systems, which are computer-based and used to monitor and control sensitive processes and physical functions. Once largely proprietary closed systems, control systems are now increasingly connected to open networks such as corporate intranets and the Internet. The expansion of control systems, including supervisory control and data acquisition, that is SCADA systems, and the ability to monitor them via the Internet has increased the vulnerability of our nation's critical infrastructure to cyber attack. As was mentioned, U.S. adversaries, whether they are nation states or rogue nations, can strike crippling blows to our nation's infrastructure from remote locations around the world. I think these nation states that have the offensive cyber attack capabilities understand that it's far cheaper and oftentimes unattributable to attack and destroy U.S. critical infrastructure through cyberspace rather than risk any type of conventional warfare. The other significant threat to our grid is, as mentioned by the chair, that of EMP. And my colleague from Maryland has done as much work on this as anybody, as I know, in the House. And it's a concept that, unfortunately, I'm afraid most members are not fully aware of. It's because of rogue nations and their ability now to command certain missile delivery systems, it seems to me that this is a far more urgent matter than it was just a number of years ago. While we understood the importance of this vulnerability during the Cold War, I'm not sure we have visited this subject with the intensity and the urgency that is necessary, so I do appreciate what we are doing in this hearing. Because of these increased cyber and EMP threats to our electric grid and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's lack of authority to address them in an expeditious manner, I've joined Chairwoman Clark and the chair of the full committee and the ranking member of the full committee in co-sponsoring H.R. 2195. I believe our legislation will provide FERC with emergency authority to create mandatory physical and cybersecurity standards to protect the electric power system. I'd just like to say we're all in this together. We're in the private sector, the public sector. We've got a lot of catching up to do. I would hope that we would try and strive for solutions and not necessarily be overly critical of all the participants in this. It's just my reflection that we have in some ways come to this late, both as a Congress, as an executive branch, as the private sector as well. And we need to work together as quickly as we can to protect this system. It is a lifeline to so much of our economic life, and actually life period in this country. And the vulnerabilities have to be recognized up front. We can't be embarrassed about them. We have to work with one another to try and solve this very urgent problem. And that's why I'm very pleased that we have this hearing today. I think we have a good lineup of witnesses that can give us various perspectives and help us move in the direction that I hope we can move in on a bipartisan basis with some urgency. So I thank the chair.
I thank you. I now recognize prime sponsor of H.R. 2195, chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Clark. Thank you for holding this critical hearing today. Like you, I'm determined to prevent any attack on the United States homeland. A multitude of failures contributed to our inability to prevent the attacks on New York City and Washington, D.C. on September 11th. Mindful of our previous mistakes, let's review the set of facts before us in today's testimony. We have significant vulnerabilities in the grid's electrical infrastructure. The infrastructure is only getting more vulnerable with smart grid technology. There's a massive computer espionage campaign being launched against the United States by our adversaries. Intelligence suggests that countries seek or have developed weapons capable of destroying our grid. A congressional commission says that our grid and the critical infrastructure that relies on the grid is not adequately protected. Our military installations are vulnerable because they rely on an insecure electric grid. The private sector is in charge of writing its own security standards, but experts have judged the standards to be ineffective in securing the infrastructure, and many utilities are avoiding compliance with these standards. I ask my colleagues here today, and those who could not join us, what more do we need to hear from before we act? We are more motivated than we need to. The warning signs are flashing red. Now is the time to act to secure the electric grid, not after a major incident has occurred. This committee has a bipartisan, bicameral legislative solution to secure the electric grid. Our bill is comprehensive in its scope because the grid is only as strong as its weakest link. We believe that all elements of the grid, from generation to transmission to distribution to metering infrastructure, should be included. Our bill covers physical attacks like electromagnetic pulse, as well as cyber attack. The Critical Electric Infrastructure Protection Act will do 4 things to improve our defensive posture. Number 1, it requires FERC to establish interim measures deemed necessary to protect against physical and cyber threats to critical electric infrastructure. This will improve existing mandatory standards. 2, it provides FERC with the authorities necessary to issue emergency orders to owners and operators of the electric grid after receiving a finding from DHS about a creditable or imminent cyber attack. 3, it requires DHS to perform ongoing cybersecurity, vulnerability, and threat assessments to the critical electric infrastructure and provide mitigation recommendations to eliminate those vulnerabilities and threats. 4, it also requires DHS to conduct an investigation to determine if the security of federally owned critical electric infrastructure has been compromised by outsiders. I'm proud of this bill. I know my colleagues are proud also. We have support of both Republican and Democratic co-sponsors. Madam Chair, I look forward to the testimony of our 2 panel of witnesses today, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Bartlett, who is widely acknowledged here on the Hill as one who's been a visionary and a leader in providing a robust roadmap for addressing the threat of EMP. And I'd like to acknowledge him and have him make his comments at this time.
Thank you very much for inviting